You and I can't just sit there when something bad happened and goes, oh, well, the vendor did that. Think of, and it was a breach. It wasn't really privacy related, but if you think about what happened with Kaseya or SolarWinds, those were third parties. And when those incidents took place, it was horrible on those businesses. And those businesses' clients don't want to hear, oh, it was a third party.
Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes, an Iron Scales podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with CISOs, security directors and architects, SOC analysts, and other InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes. I'm your host for today's episode, Brendan Rudd, Community Director at IronScales, an email security platform powered by AI, enhanced by thousands of customer security teams, and built around detecting and removing threats in the inbox. We offer a service that is fast to deploy, easy to operate, and is unparalleled in the ability to stop all types of email threats, including advanced attacks like business email compromise, account takeover, and more. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into the show. Hey Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, man. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule today to talk to us about privacy. But before we begin, I would love it if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about you, your background, and what you're working on.
Yeah, sure. Name is Dave Tuckman, Tuckman. And if anybody's interested, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. There's not too many Tuckmans out there, so I'm easy to find. But the day job is I'm the Director of Engineering for Secure Smart Office out in San Diego. We provide managed security and IT solutions specifically to small and mid-sized businesses. You think of the organizations that normally don't have the budgets or access to the types of resources that smaller companies need. And you can be talking anything from a one-person organization to a couple hundred we have. And then we'll also partner with other IT companies and provide the security, compliance, and privacy mixed to the overall recipe of trying to make somebody secure.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. So we're going to be talking about privacy today, starting with Privacy 101 from all three sides of the counter, as you call it. And we'll let you explain that a little later, but let's get into the show. So for everyone out there, setting the stage, what is data privacy?
Sure. And what I wanted to do with everything is just really start off explaining what things are, then how they apply, because we can really go down into the weeds with privacy with everything that's going on. But essentially, data privacy is about a person having the ability to have some control over the information that's out there about themselves. When you get into more formal definitions, it generally means the ability of a person to determine for themselves when, how, and to what extent their information is shared or communicated with others. When we talk about personal information, it's the information that makes you unique. Your name, your location, your address, health information, anything that makes Brendan uniquely Brendan.
And how does privacy relate to cybersecurity?
If we look at the fundamental pillars of cybersecurity, the triangle or the triad is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And confidentiality is where information is confidential or only shared with those that should have access to it. Integrity is that information doesn't get tampered with in an unauthorized way, and availability is that information is accessible so the company can do or the organization can do what it needs to do with it. Within the tenet of confidentiality, privacy falls in there. It's how that data gets managed in a confidential manner in respect to the individual that it's about.
So, would you mind unpacking a little bit without going too much into the weeds? What is privacy and what is privacy in the digital age?
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about the information that's about you or about me uniquely in a lot of organizations, especially when you get into social media, the original terms and conditions of a Facebook or a Twitter is if you shared your information, as soon as you posted it to that platform, it became property of that platform. So if you were creating your Facebook account, it's going to ask you your name, your address, your birth date, who your partner, spouse, family, and then it starts wanting to know who your friends are and all of that stuff. And it can really start to snowball on who knows what, where, and things like that. So that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. And now that privacy regulations are starting to come out, I think GDPR was probably the one that really made it most pronounced that the company shouldn't have that type of power or that type of control, that control needs to be transferred back over to the individual and that they have some say over it. And then depending on which regulation or when you get into specifics, where the lines get drawn in the sand on where your rights are and then how it plays out from there. That makes sense.
And could you also elaborate a bit more on what is confidentiality in the digital space?
Yeah, confidentiality is the intent that, let's say you and I have our business and we're partners. We're going to start having information in that business, whether it's about people, about the company, maybe it's about employees, maybe it's about customers, maybe it's about the products that we use or the technologies that make the products, whether it's anything from making a physical widget or to some sort of intellectual property that happens a lot within the cyber realm. You and I want to protect that information. We don't want to just let all of that be out there and publicly available. So we want to add some layer of confidentiality to that. And that's what allows you and I to determine what is very private information versus what can be shared and or information that you and I really don't want to have get out. But if it were to get out, it wouldn't kill us. It would be okay. It's not as private or secret as other information. So that's where you and I apply confidentiality to how we manage the data that goes through our organization. And then privacy is personal information within there that people can turn around and say, I give you the okay to do this with it, or I don't. HR needs to have some information. It's inevitable that they get it. But does that make sense?
Yeah, so to summarize, it's really an extension of privacy. Confidentiality is an extension of privacy.
Yeah, an extension or almost a subset of it. Because as business partners, we're going to have all kinds of information and some of it needs to be private, some of it needs to be, it is okay. So that subset of what we want to keep private and who has the rights to say where that information can be shared.
Got it. And now that we've set the stage, you talked about all three sides of the counter. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. Normally, things are binary. It's you and I. We're having a conversation. Things can be yes or no. But I reference three sides of the counter because there's actually three parties that come together to figure out what is the overall agreement or standards in which we're going to all abide by. One is you and I have our business. So that's one side of the counter. We're trying to build our business, we're trying to do these things, and we have information. On a second side of the counter, but it isn't just us and the customer, and they're on the other side of the counter. The third side is where regulations come in, whether it's laws or like a HIPAA, a GDPR. Many countries are creating not only are many countries creating their privacy standards, but within the US, we don't have a federal standard. So different states are putting theirs together. And so now that you and I have our business and we're trying to build our business, we're trying to take care of that customer, we have to make sure that we're managing that data in a way that the government or regulation says that we do. So we've really got the client, the organization, and regulation. And those are the three sides of the counter.
And then I think a great segue to that would be, what are the laws that govern data privacy? There are a lot of, like you mentioned, different bodies and regulations within the United States. We also have global ones like GDPR in South Africa is a new one. Can you walk us through some of those regional and global implications and maybe anything that you can share on each of those?
Sure. And actually, if we can include them, I've got some links that people can use to go for additional information if they want to take it past this. So if we can share those with everybody, that would be awesome. But to the question, I'm in San Diego, you're in Atlanta. So you and I have our business. So right now we're impacted by US federal regulations and HIPAA, the protection of health related information. If we have anything that we do that falls under that category, our business needs to abide by those regulations, which are federal, and it impacts all of the states. But because I'm in California, and if you and I are successful enough and our business is doing enough business that California has its private regulations that got passed a couple of years ago. And that's the California Consumer Privacy Act. And that was one where California really followed Europe's GDPR. So now you and I have to abide by HIPAA regulations, CCPA regulations, and we have to put together a model that hits both of those. Then if we find that we have customers that are in the European Union, now our organization is bound by HIPAA, CCPA, and GDPR. So we have to build a model that addresses all of these so we're compliant. And one of the links that's shared in there, it's an excellent one that I found doing my research from an organization called Wirewheel. And if you bring it up, it will literally on one side say, this is CCPA. The other side, it'll say GDPR. And it'll show you A/B of a comparison of how those two are similar and how they're different. And then as I had looked it up, I think there's almost 70 different country regulations now. So the bigger you get until That's just the lay of the land. And this is all new. Security's been around a while. Privacy's still more of a relatively new thing. So you see humanity trying to figure it out as we go.
Yeah. Would you say there is like a gold standard if you can successfully comply with one of the major privacy acts? Would it be fairly easy to adapt and build on that to support some of the other regulations?
Yes, because they all, even though they're worded differently and there's some unique variations from one to another, the overarching intent is consistent across them. So and the magic formula that you and I need to use for our business is ultimately it's how we manage the data that our organization has. And if we come up with a responsible way in support of, say, GDPR, and we can clarify, have our process of how we collect information, what information we collect, how we collect it, how we use it, how we store it, how long we're going to hang on to it for, and how we're going to dispose of it once it's done. If we can clarify all of that, we're at a very close place to being universally compliant.
So, having said all that, what are some of the challenges users and businesses face when protecting their online privacy?
The organization needs to know who they're doing business with, and the, like we said, the data that they're collecting and how they're managing it. Now, using our partnership as an example, we can collect that data, but there's probably a good chance we're working with some third-party vendors. Maybe there's a platform that we use for the marketing of our company, like a HubSpot, a MailChimp, even who we use email through. We're going to be partnered up with those vendors. So we have some responsibility on knowing what that vendor's due process and due care is. Because even though you and I can't just sit there when something bad happened, goes, oh, well, the vendor did that. Think of, and it was a breach. It wasn't really privacy related, but if you think about what happened with Kaseya or SolarWinds, those were third parties. And when those incidents took place, it was horrible on those businesses. And those businesses' clients don't want to hear, oh, it was a third party. They gave us their business. They gave us their trust. They're relying on us. So we have to give some due diligence on who we partner with for that data that we've collected. As individuals, you want to think about what is being shared on social media. And that could almost do a whole podcast on that, because whether my son's 13, so you can see the fun that my wife and I get to have when we're not doing the day job. It doesn't end. But think about somebody who wants to get into cybersecurity as a career, or maybe within privacy within cybersecurity. What you post on social media is your digital footprint. And if you were irresponsible, I was young and dumb. Now I'm just dumb. You want to think about things like that and how we're all part of a larger society, online, digital society. And with everything that's out there, we obviously have criminals and that want to use the cyber domain for their benefit. And if you think about going after identity theft or if you have a company that you want to go after, think about all the open source content that's there, not even about the company, but about the people that are within the company, the employees, and what are they doing. There is a huge resource of information. Those all kind of become challenges that are your and I business want to think about and want to take into consideration.
Yeah, from all the breaches we've heard of, like, it's almost futile. Like, once you give your information out, you should probably expect it to be used against you or exposed at some point, because it doesn't seem like companies are able to protect our data, our privacy, like you said.
Yeah, before it started hitting the headlines and stuff like this, companies didn't care. We deal so much with, I don't want to say they didn't care, but a lot of them didn't. And if it's a small business or regular, or it was discretionary, they weren't being told this is the law, you must behave. They would think more about how to just run their business. And there's actually, I hate to say it's a joke, but one of the things that we will joke around about is we basically live, my mindset and where I work, we're basically of the mindset that everybody's personal information is already out there. You may not find it by doing a Google. It may not be able to do Dave Tuckman's social security number, Google search, and have it come right up. But if you think about what's available on the dark web and all of the organizations that had at some point in time needing to know what my social security number is, it's out there. And at least one of those places has been breached. And we joke around about it with HIPAA because this is data that doesn't often change. Your social security number is not going to change. Your blood type isn't going to change. Your eyes, your average height and build, all of those things are pretty, your fingerprint, all of those things are pretty fixed and they've been collected. And a lot of different places have them. And if you and I were to sit there and say, make a list of every place that has it, we don't know, because we don't know who those places traded it with or shared it with. And that's why I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but I think some of the issues we have with cybersecurity is that we're playing catch up. We never built security into the model in the beginning. And that's why everybody's secure as a sponge. And we're trying to figure out, and now we're really trying to, how can we fix it? How can we plug those holes in the boat? And then privacy becomes part of that as well.
Yeah, you read my mind on the next question I had, which was like, we're always told by security leaders, at least nowadays, that we need to be more on the offense. But as an end user, if it's out of our hands, like if the companies cannot protect the data that we entrust them with, it really feels like the end user, the consumer, really has no choice but to play defense all the time and just be aware that their data is out there and that they need to be conscious, cognizant of phishing attacks and social engineering, if it's email phishing, postal, even like real life social engineering. Like, it doesn't really end in the digital domain. It can happen offline as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where how can I say it? I think that's where the social engineering and the criminal activity existed before the internet. The internet just made data much more accessible, and yeah, it's much more available and it's borderless. Even if the old line of, I forget the guy's name, but why did you rob banks? because that's where the money is. But you wouldn't just be from Russia and say, I'm going to go rob a bank in Texas. You had some sort of geographical limitation on where you could operate, and that all changed. So when it becomes the individual, we try and apply a variation of the zero trust rule, which is just if somebody came up to you on the street and said, hey, buddy, can I get your social security number? Or where do you live? What's your pet's name? Where did you go to school? You want, well, why are you asking me this? And you want to just, I don't want to say live on. It's not to get paranoid, but the same rules that we learn on how to keep ourselves secure in a physical environment, it can be applied towards cyber. And if we can get those fundamentals in place, then the other stuff starts to fall into place because we're at least thinking properly about stuff, and then the thoughts come from there. Similar to what we were chatting about right before we hit the record button on the need, my belief that everybody needs security awareness training. Whether it's, I personally think it should be taught in schools. If we want tomorrow's generation to be secure, they need to understand what this stuff is. And I think that, and if we can do that and create a community vibe, and I see you doing something, I can, hey, dude, I want to be your bro. Do you realize what you just did? And try and help make you better. Students can help teachers. We can all help our parents and our grandparents, the thing. But yeah, you really just want to focus on, would you do it in the real world? Or if you wouldn't do it in the real world, don't do it in the Matrix, kind of thing.
Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by IronScales, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
Yeah. And I think to tie a bow on this, you mentioned it earlier, everybody needs awareness training. And I think the biggest misconception is that I'm not a target. I have nothing to hide. I'm not a target. So therefore business as usual, which I think is the biggest mistake, because things can be used against you. You just don't know what yet. You could also be a pawn in the bigger scheme of things. So you may think, oh, I'm not a target. I don't have anything to lose. But you could also be a target of fraud when you're buying a house and someone scams you into transferring the funds into the wrong account. This is a very big scheme that still exists today. Or you could be a pawn in a bigger scheme against your company. People could get access to your information and use that data to attack your company or your friends, your family. You just don't know.
You're exactly right. What we run into, which can be frustrating in supporting small businesses, is a lot of them think that they're too small to be a target. And it's not that someone's wrong when they say that. I think that's just the wrong argument to have, because if, like you said, let's say you're a small business with 15 employees or 10. Every one of your employees is online, and every one of them can be that quote unquote pawn or a gateway to something larger. And at the same time, you could, if you look at who really was impacted by the Kaseya breach, it was the small companies. The hackers just knew, if I can get in here, I've got access to hundreds of accounts. And there were dentists, small clinics, small businesses, any small business that thinks they're being proactive because they hire an IT company. IT companies use solutions like SolarWinds or Kaseya. So it gets into it. Yeah, it can, you just, it's almost saying I can walk down the street and I'm too small to get mugged. Sure you are. I'm not going to say you're wrong, and hopefully you're in the right neighborhood that it doesn't happen, but anybody's a target. Anybody's a target, and the most attractive car to break into is the unlocked one.
Yeah, and I think if there's one takeaway, I think that's one of the most important that we should take away from this episode. But moving on to, what are some of the challenges organizations face when protecting user privacy? You touched on a couple, but there's a lot more to go through.
Yeah, if we go back to the partnership that you and I have, we want to say, okay, so this is our business. We make a widget and people like our widget. But what are the challenges that we have to face as an organization? It could be the compliance. It could be the regulations. It could be the crime that we've talked about. And within crime, there's data. Maybe we have the most awesomest secret sauce on how to make the best widget. People will want that. Our competitor can technically be better if they have it, even if they don't use it, but they know what they've got. So we're looking at how to protect, again, falling under the confidentiality. And then insider threats. There was actually an article I was reading last week where ransomware has become such a mature enough business that the ransomware gangs are recruiting disgruntled employees and saying, if you put this software on that network, you can have 40% of the revenue that we generate from ransomware. So whether you're small or large, those are challenges that you and I face. You and I can trust each other blindly, but at some point, if we're successful, we need to hire a third person. So it's those sorts of looking at the landscape and what are the risks that come with it.
And in your opinion, what are some of the solutions to, some of the challenges that organizations are facing in terms of compliance, data breaches, insider threat? Doesn't seem like things are getting better anytime soon.
We did a presentation for ISECA San Diego almost 2 weeks ago. And the topic was ransomware and what you need to know as an organization. And one of the participants in it, the guy was awesome. He just kept popping in the chat with thoughts. And he said, hey, we need to segment out the network. We need multi-factor. We need encryption. And throughout the whole presentation, every piece of advice he gave was gold. He was absolutely right. And when it got to the end of the and I was acknowledging him through it, but when it got to the end, I said, all of those things are correct. And any organization that's implementing those is exponentially more secure. The problem is, culturally, less than 10% of businesses are doing that. And that's where the real challenge and risk from it comes from. We just, and I think that's why you hear me get on the soapbox about security awareness training. Because the reality is what that does more than anything is it starts making people aware. And if you're aware, then you can talk about it. And it becomes part of the narrative. So I think that the biggest thing that needs to happen is just an initial better awareness. And then from there, regardless of what the organization is or the size, they can decide what's best for them from there.
Yeah, because it seems like a reoccurring theme that just focus on the basics before trying to get all fancy and solve for problems that don't necessarily exist, or you're trying to fit products into solutions that don't require products to solve them.
Yeah. You just really want to. One thing that we use a lot in our organization as a framework is the CIS 18. And what that says is the first standard is hardware inventory. And if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. So you got to have an understanding of what you have so then you can protect it. And then as soon as you at least so think about a small organization. Do they have that hardware ID? Probably not. And so that's one thing we work with to identify that, because then you can tell that device shouldn't be on the network because we know what our inventory is. And as soon as you can identify and inventory the hardware and start to protect it, then the next thing becomes the software. What is that? But it all starts with those basic steps. You nailed it, where we'll get hit from vendors all the time going, hey, you need our new tool. It fixes this and nothing else. And it's got AI and next generation and all sorts of buzzwords. But you just really want to focus on the simple fundamental of what you're trying to accomplish, that risk that you're trying to mitigate. And then we can say, okay, once we've identified it, what is the best way? And then you can see which vendor or solution that, like you said, it might not even require a vendor to be able to address it and take care of.
Yeah, and perhaps even going one step back, perhaps the way I see it is like when you're insuring your house, you want to understand how much value is in the house, and then what is the risk profile of your house. Do you have burglar bars? Do you have an alarm system? So understanding how much is at risk, and then how much you need to invest to protect that risk. So you could connect that to an audit and strategy, and then to your point, what's at risk at the company in terms of software and hardware.
Perfect example using that's just an excellent non-technical analogy, and you can literally take that analogy and it also applies to cybersecurity insurance and what is becoming those requirements. Yeah, just using your example, the worst time to tell the insurance company what you had in the house, or the worst time to figure that out, is after the break-in. You know what you've got, and then you're telling them, And what will happen with the insurance if you go, oh yeah, so sure, I have an alarm and I have locks and I've even got an armed guard out in the front, at the front, just to make sure the mailman's the mailman. And you say all of that stuff to get the policy and hopefully make the policy be a little bit less expensive. But if something happens and then they go, okay, where's your proof of having this armed guard at your front door? Oh, I was just kind of making it up. You're not going to get covered.
Yeah, and it's quite scary how easy it is to get cyber insurance today from speaking to some folks in the industry. But that's a whole nother topic on its own, which we will definitely
Could be another podcast.
we'll
Yeah.
definitely be covering that in the next few months. But looking ahead, what can we expect in the privacy realm? What do you see?
Well, I think the good news is even being able to have this podcast helps raise awareness and helps get the dialogue going, which is really the first step in what we need. So I think that's the positive. On the negative or less positive side, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. It took the name's escaping me, but what was the pipeline that got compromised? Do you remember the name of it? Colonial, thank you. Yeah, that had to happen to make more people aware. And it's what happened to Colonial, but it's also what happened to all of the people that needed gas up and down the East Coast. I think that humans tend to be, especially Americans, tend to be, those bad things have to happen. Laws are reactive. So I do think we're going to see more breaches, more incidents that make the headlines, which will lead to more regulations. And ultimately, even though it's bumpy, regulations make it better. It gives it more of a baseline. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But if we can all do those basic things and be aware, that's when we'll start to see things turn around.
So just a quick spoiler on the Colonial Pipeline. If you go to one of the previous episodes of Cybersecurity Heroes, my guest, Nick Espinoza, he actually broke a story where the Colonial Pipeline, the OT system was not compromised. It was actually the payment system was compromised, and they could have kept the gas running. They just decided to shut it down because, I don't know, it was probably more expensive to figure out how to charge customers after they solved the problem. And even the ransomware payment was probably cheaper than trying to solve free gas until they solved it. But the whole episode was not based purely on Colonial, but it was a really interesting episode where we debunked some of the breaches in the headlines. They're not always transparent with their PR statements.
No, dude, you're right. And that touches on culture. There was a technical breach or incident, but look at what the culture said was determined to be the best reaction to it.
I mean, it caused total chaos, and they're not being held responsible for that because it's not a regulated market like the other big five. So they were able to get away with it. But anyway, what are the employment opportunities for people in the privacy realm?
The thing about within privacy, what's really cool is it still is relatively newer. So it's growing rapidly. And as you see all of these different countries or states implementing their regulations, all of that is a growing industry. And within that industry, when we talk about security and people think, oh, it's exciting with pen testing and stuff like that, the stuff that happens behind the scenes is as important. And there's positions for auditors, data privacy specialists. Within GDPR, the organization needs to have a data privacy office. And I may be wrong with the word officer, but somebody within that organization needs to take ownership of how they're managing data and the privacy of the data. It's a growing industry.
And as we close out today's episode, I want to touch on a controversial bit of news that came out on August 5th. Apple announced a new feature being built into the app. Yeah, this new feature being built into the upcoming iOS 15, iPad OS 15, the Watch OS 8, and Mac OS Monterey software updates. And basically, it's designed to detect if people have child exploitation images or videos stored on their device. And this was an article. I just picked one. This one was from CNET, and it goes on to say Apple said it developed the system to protect people's privacy, performing scans on the phone and only raising alarms if a certain number of matches are found. But privacy experts who agree that fighting child exploitation is a good thing, they worry that Apple's moves open the door to wider uses that could, for example, put political dissidents and other innocent people in harm's way. So before we move on to the implications of this backdoor, is there anything you would like to add around this statement and this news?
Yeah, wow. Thanks for closing with an easy question.
Our trademark.
I love it. That's beautiful. Well, like you said, this came out earlier this month, and it's a big deal. And there is we can't say it's right or wrong in one or two sentences. This is a whole other can of worms, Pandora's box kind of a thing. Like you said, the first what it does is it creates a backdoor, and that backdoor will be used to scan those photos and scan the photos and messages, looking for that type of information that would trigger these alarms. Part of the big deal on this is you and I were joking around about it in using Chrome. To me, Chrome's open source surveillance software. It just, there's the line that if you're not the customer, you're the commodity. So so you can have it for free. Exactly. I think the first takeaway anybody can take is there's essentially two types of phones that you can get. One that runs an Android or one that runs an iPhone or the iOS. And to me, the Google stuff's always been that way of surveillance software. Maybe that's wrong or I'm wrong in using it, but look at their business model. They need that data. So you always knew what was happening with them, or at least what their intent was. Apple was on the pole 180 degrees on the opposite, that privacy mattered. It had to be secure. There was no backdoor. There was no it is your data and you have control over it. This changes that. There literally won't be a device readily available that anybody can expect privacy on. Now, this is under the premise that they're looking for photos that they can compare against for child sexual abuse and stuff like that. I'm not a child sexual abuser, so I really don't have anything to feel like I have to worry about with that. But a backdoor is a backdoor. And everything that we've talked about is on privacy. And the line is, are you more secure with a wall or a door? And with this change, we've gone from building walls to putting up doors. And it's not so much what's going to happen right here and now, but how this is going to play out over a longer period of time, which kind of gets into the implications of where I don't want to say that where this is going, but where I think we want to watch that it could potentially go. And one of the things that never gets talked about in any of this much is that to do this, Apple changed their definition of end-to-end encryption. It used to be between you and I, only you and I saw it. That's not the case anymore. It's now opened up where if something triggers it, a third party is alerted. So that kind of that plays a role into it. And like I said, a backdoor is a backdoor. So any rogue cyber criminal activity just was shown something very exciting to look for.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out on many levels. I will definitely keep this topic top of mind and would love to get some more guests to break down the various intricacies and implications and any data that comes out of this in the future. I think it will be something really interesting to follow.
Yeah. And then the other ethical question is, I'm going to cut you off, is who's going to have access to that back door? We're in the US, we're really one federal regulation away from saying that the government gets access to it. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this, that's why I say we don't know what's going to happen. But even using your Colonial Pipeline example, and you looked at how culture or somebody thought it was good to make the decisions that they did that wreaked havoc on the East Coast. Potentially, something like that could happen.
And I'm not sure if the alternatives are better. Okay, everyone goes to Android, but how do we know, how can we trust that Android, Google are not already doing these things? Maybe it's not a backdoor to the government. Maybe there is a backdoor. Who knows what they're doing with our data? So yes, maybe people will migrate. I don't know, but I'm not sure if you're better off on an Android device with a Google phone or, like you said, using Chrome and open source surveillance browser. Just seems like they're all bad options.
Yeah. Would you like to hang out in the frying pan or the fire?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of tough. And then that's where, whether it's an individual or an organization, we're not going to live life without risk in any capacity. But that's where it circles back to identifying what that risk is and identifying what that appetite for risk is.
Yeah, 100%. So, Dave, it's been fascinating talking with you and learning from you about privacy. It's been really interesting and hope our guests got some value out of it as well. You did mention earlier on, if anyone wants to connect with you, the best place was LinkedIn, right?
Yes. Yeah. Tuckman. There's not a lot of us out there.
Awesome. So we'll also include the links and references you gave if anybody would like to dive deeper into the privacy and regulation acts for the different countries. We'll also put those in the show notes. But before we close out, is there anything you think we missed that you would like to add before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think for everything that we covered, everything starts with the first step. And so without trying to look at all of this and go, oh, dear Lord, what are we going to do? Maybe we just hope for a rapture and everything will be better. It just starts with awareness and understanding where you're at, whether it's as an individual or as an organization, and work with someone. This is what we do. I don't want to make it be about us, but there's a lot of information. So if you can at least start with the fundamentals of awareness and have someone that you can reach out to for questions. You're going to have them. And just try and find that trusted advisor that you can work with. It's very similar to having an attorney, having a CPA. We're going in that direction. And I can see having a privacy or security/privacy person in your corner is a good thing to have.
Yeah, definitely. As things become more complex, I agree. So thank you so much again for taking the time to join us today on Cybersecurity Heroes. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Dude, thank you. Thank you to everybody that checks this out. And thank you for not only having me, but making this, the podcast, as such a valuable resource to the community that they are.
Thank you.
You're awesome, man. Thank you.
Appreciate the feedback, and we hope to chat with you again soon.
Cool. Right on. Thanks.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.